Have you ever wondered how our body maintains its shape and moves? Well, to answer your question, this is all due to the skeletal and muscular systems, which provide the main functions of movement and protection around our body. And how does this work, you may ask? Well, let's find out. The skeletal system is made up of bones that are composed of mineralized calcium phosphate, cartilage,
which allows for flexible and rubbery skeletal movement, joints
that support in holding the bones together, and ligaments,
which are fibrous tissues that connect bones to each other.
The most basic function of the skeletal system is to support and provide structure for the body, interacting with the skeletal muscle. Without our skeletal systems, animals may not be able to hold their shape. A second major function of the skeletal system is to provide protection for the fragile and vital organs or tissues such as the brain, lungs, and heart, which are protected by the skull and rib cage. Another function is to facilitate movement such as jumping, lifting, or grasping things. This body's motion is caused by the joints between bones and muscles, and in these bones and muscles, potassium and calcium minerals are stored. This system also produces red, white, and yellow blood cells. As humans, we have two different types of skeletal structures, called the axial skeleton and the appendicular skeleton. The axial skeleton transmits the weight from the head, the trunk, and the upper extremities down to the low extremities at the hip joints, whereas the appendicular skeleton aids in walking and other movements. It also protects the major organs for digestion, excretion, and reproduction.
So now that we've talked about the skeletal system and its functions, let's talk about the muscular system. The functions of the muscular system include maintaining body movement and posture while the skeletal muscles attach to bones and support tissues and organs. It also stores nutrients and maintains the body temperature.
The muscle is made up of thousands of fibers, which consist of even smaller fibers called the microfibril. These microfibrils contain contractile units called sarcomeres. Sarcomere consists of an alternating thick and thin protein filament, giving the skeletal muscle its saturated appearance. The thick filaments are myosin, which are anchored at the center. The thin filaments are composed of the protein actin, which are anchored at the Z-line on the outer center. These filaments slide in and out between each other to give rise to muscle contractions.
Now let's talk about the voluntary muscles. Motor neurons are located on the muscle fibers. They transmit movement impulses to the muscle. There are three types of muscles in the muscular system. The cardiac and smooth muscle, which are involuntary, which means that they're contracted unconsciously, and then there's the skeletal muscle, which is voluntary, which means that it's contracted consciously. First, let's talk about the involuntary muscles. First, let's talk about the smooth muscles. They lack striations because of the uniform distribution of myosin filaments in the cells. It makes up the walls of many internal organs and structures and can be found in the digestive tract, bladder, and blood vessels. It also adjusts the blood vessels, which regulates the blood flow through the arteries and air and lungs, relaxes and contracts the urinary bladder and uterus, focuses vision, and allows the gastrointestinal tract to move food along. The other type of involuntary muscle is the cardiac muscle. This is the type of muscle that makes up your heart. This muscle is known as the myocardium also. It only has one job, but it's very important. Its job is to pump blood through the miles of blood vessels in your body. If the cardiac muscle stops, you stop. Under a microscope, you would notice that cardiac muscle is striated, which simply means it looks like it is striped. This striated muscle forms the contractile wall of the heart. Its cells are joined by intercalated discs that relay the electrical signals underlying each heartbeat. Cardiac muscle is involuntary because the heart has its own electrical system that causes it to beat consistently.
Now, let's talk about the voluntary muscles.
Skeletal muscles have striated muscle cells that control body movement.
The skeletal
And
muscle
they are attached to
follows the sliding
skeletons. They
filament
contract
theory.
and extend the
The
tendons through the
signal
brain
from the
signals.
motor neuron causes calcium ions to flow into the muscle cell. The calcium binds to troponin, which changes its shape. This exposes the binding site of actin, which now binds myosin. ATP binds to the myosin and causes the actual movement.
The muscular and skeletal systems are closely related and very dependent on one another. They both provide the framework for how the body is shaped and the pieces for the body that aid in movement. The bones come together at the joints, and the motor neurons connect to individual fibers, thus causing the muscles to contract. Once the muscles contract, we are able to achieve more complex movements such as walking or typing on a computer. Needless to say, the muscular and skeletal systems work together simultaneously.